Everyone comes from somewhere, and where we come from shapes how we live our lives. For the past 20 years at the U, I've been studying the lives of Korean youth adopted internationally by white families. I'm interested in how adoptees navigate the paradox of growing up as a minority in their own family with minimal connection to their Korean heritage. Though I'm not adopted, how people make sense of their ethnicity and race resonate with my immigrant family upbringing. My parents immigrated from South Korea in the mid-1960s and owned family cleaners and tailors while I was growing up in Connecticut. I pay tribute to my parents' dreams and sacrifices by referring to my research team as the Family Lab. My 87-year-old dad now lives with my family. He's an artist, and in his backyard studio paints Korean landscapes from memory. My new work is trying to capture how homeland yearnings persist among immigrants, even 50 years later. My area of research broadly focuses on the ways in which race, ethnicity, migration experiences affect human development in youth and families. More specifically, I'm interested in how Korean adoptees raised in white families learn about their heritage culture and how to negotiate race in America. I came to study Korean adoption when I arrived here at Minnesota. Minnesota has one of the largest per capita of Korean adoptees in the United States. And there happened to be a couple of other faculty members who were beginning a project to look at international adoption. And when I arrived here, I was able to join them on that project. But my interest was specifically in how they negotiated their ethnic and racial experiences growing up transnationally, transracially in a white family. And so early on in 2000, I started on that work and have really continued to this day. When I started to do research on Korean adoption, I knew very little about this particular community. And so it really required that I immerse myself in the Korean adoption culture and the community, locally and nationally. And that was a very different approach to doing research because the focus for me was really on first just getting to understand this community as a whole. What did they see as the most pressing issues facing the community as a whole, and then within families, and then within individuals. And so I really wanted to give voice to Korean adoptees first and foremost, and to center their narrative in the research I do. Most research on international adoption tends to focus on adoptive parents and child outcomes, looking at adoption as a natural intervention that alters the course of these children's lives. My interest, though, was in the post-adoption experiences of these kids as they grow up in white families. How do they learn about what it means to be Korean? How do they learn about being a minority in this country? How do they negotiate racism and discrimination? And so I really wanted to focus on the adoptee experience from their perspective. Not from the perspective of adoptive parents, not from the perspective of adoption agencies. And being immersed in that community and learning from them really helped me to prioritize their voice. For me, studying Korean adoption is about studying Korean immigration more broadly. I'm really interested in the diaspora of people, how people are dispersed around the world and how they create their own communities in these different settings. So to me, what's really important is understanding the diasporic experiences of immigrants and how people from one country can settle into many different lands, many different countries, and learn how to develop a sense of belonging, a sense of home in these new environments. For Korean adoptees living in the United States, growing up in white communities, there's an additional sort of set of challenges that they have that's different than an immigrant coming and settling even in the same environment, because within their homes at least, everyone is ethnically similar, racially similar, and they have those socialization experiences in the family to sort of help them develop their sense of identity, their sense of who they are, where they came from. For Korean adoptees, that's a more difficult journey in many ways. Much of what they learn about their Korean heritage is dependent on what their parents expose them to. And of course, that's a challenge because for many adoptive parents, there's a huge disconnect between their own backgrounds and Korean American community and Korean culture in Korea. And so a lot of kids have to then learn those experiences on their own as they get older, as they move out of the home. And they don't have that benefit of growing up in that environment with their family. The Family Lab focuses on the racial and ethnic experiences of immigrant and minoritized youth and families. And we're particularly interested in culture-specific risk and protective factors that affect their development. Those range from experiences of discrimination to ethnic identity development to acculturation experiences to ethnic and racial socialization practices within the family. Ethnic and racial socialization focuses on how parents in particular, but also peers, teach their children about their ethnic heritage, their identities, as well as prepare them for discrimination and racism in the world. And for immigrant families, what we have found is that they tend to focus primarily on ethnic socialization, teaching their kids about their ethnic heritage and culture and to have pride in that. And so that as those children get older, they will develop a positive ethnic identity. Oftentimes, what immigrant families struggle with is how to prepare their children for discrimination, because the parents themselves immigrated as adults. And so for them, it's not a surprise that they're being discriminated against or that people are commenting on their accents that they may have. And the parents also have a clear understanding of who they are, so they're less affected by the discrimination that they may experience, and they learn to sort of bear with it, so to speak. But for kids, kids are American born, American raised, and to be treated as if you're a foreigner or different is a bigger challenge for them. So then if you imagine if you're a Korean adoptee raised in a white family, how much more complicated it must be to learn more about your heritage, to develop pride in your heritage when you don't see it around you at all. And how do you handle discrimination and racism when your parents are not exposed to that at all? And parents have to make a much more direct, explicit effort to teach their kids about these things, but it can be a challenge when they themselves have never had to experience it. The vast majority of research on ethnic minority mental health has largely focused on the African American experience. And that's certainly understandable given the long history of African Americans in this country, the racism and discrimination that they've experienced, and the major disparities across all domains of life. The challenge, of course, is that Asian American experiences have often been invisible and overlooked. And when it has been studied, Asian Americans are often seen as a monominority, right? High achieving, never having problems. But that type of ethnic glossing is deeply problematic because there are many serious problems and challenges, as well as much more rich dynamic experiences within these Asian American communities. And that has typically been ignored in psychology, whether it's immigrants, adoptees, or refugees. Those experiences are not well understood. And yet, understanding how they navigate society, challenges, difficulties, life transitions, can contribute to our broader understanding of how people from different backgrounds can adapt and adjust to living in a new society or a new country. For me, adoption is a lifelong event, and how people negotiate that adoption experience over their life course is really important. And so the work I do focuses on the post-adoption experiences of adopted individuals and how adoption is a recurrent experience at any life transition, really. So when an adopted individual first experiences discrimination, what does that say about who they are? How does it challenge their sense of family, their sense of community? When an adopted individual moves out of the home and begins their own independent life, what does it mean for them to suddenly be seen differently, in a different light, when they're not with their white family? When an adoptee gets married and has their own child, and for the first time in their life has a child that looks like them, has someone in their family that looks like them, what does that mean to their identity of who they are? And how does it make them think about their own birth family? And so, for me, adoption is a lifelong experience, and how that intersects with their ethnicity and their race is really fascinating, because it tells us a lot about the complexities of life itself. We reach communities sometimes by going into those communities, but of course now with the internet, a lot of things are really done through surveys online, through Zoom interviews, and it's made it actually much easier for us to reach hard-to-reach populations. Studying minorities is not as convenient and as accessible as it is to study college students or, white populations in Minnesota. So our work really requires us to be more creative in how we recruit families. Sometimes we work with agencies and clinics that are serving populations, and other times we're doing direct outreach to those communities. When I first got involved in research on adoption, my collaborators and I would go on essentially a library tour where we were giving talks to different communities around the state of Minnesota, just to get them familiar with who we are and what our intent was. We wanted to ensure that they didn't feel like we were just sort of zooming in to collect data and then pulling out, that we really had an investment in hearing what were the needs and issues facing the community, and that we were there to serve them the best we could. We'd go to, hold lectures and presentations at public libraries, or not always there. It would sometimes be at adoption agencies, or in the summers we'd go to these culture camps that were put on by adoptive parents that brought together Korean adoptees from around the state and actually from around the country to come for a week and immerse themselves in Korean culture and be around other Korean adoptees. Sometimes it was just, talking with them to hear what they thought were the most important issues to be studied. Right. But then also, right, to invite them to consider participating in a study, whether it's a survey or an interview, or bringing them into the campus for some other kind of assessment. My research directly informs my teaching. I have, for many years, taught different freshman seminars. Until recently, I was teaching a freshman seminar on Asian American psychology, and much of what I would teach students drew upon the different kinds of research that we were doing in our lab, but also that others are doing that we're familiar with. For me, what's really important is to provide a nice blend of history, psychological research, and also making it become very real to the students. And I would do that by oftentimes bringing in local artists and activists who are on the ground, really immersed in these different communities. So I would bring in spoken word artists, Asian American spoken word artists, photographers. I'd have students go to the local Asian American theater, and we would use those types of guest speakers and outings as a way to bring to life what they were learning in the articles and readings. The other freshman seminar I've been teaching more recently, and now I have some grad students teaching it while I'm doing administrative work, is called Race in Everyday Space. And that course is focused more broadly on race relations and the psychology of race in America. And for that class, one of the things I do is have students develop a digital story that captures both their own experiences as it relates to race in America, but also pulls in the scholarship to connect their own life experiences with how we're studying the issues. I'm at a stage in my career where I'm reflecting on the privileges I have, and that's got me thinking a lot about how we as professors, as faculty and graduate training programs can prepare the next generation. And we live in a country at a time where in the next generation, in the next 20 years, the majority population in the United States will not be white. Knowing that in the next 20 years, we will be a majority-minority country, will the field of psychology be representative of that diversity? And I've decided to make a shift in the way I typically recruit graduate students to reflect that diversity. While I still want graduate students who are interested in the kind of work I'm doing, which largely is centered on the Asian American experience, I also want to give opportunities and to learn from and to work with students whose experiences are different than mine, but who reflect this growing diversity that we have. And that's also why I have led the department in developing the diversity in psychology program, which is designed to bring in and actively recruit students from diverse, underrepresented backgrounds, to help coach them on the graduate admissions process, to showcase our department and what we have to offer here at the University of Minnesota, with the hope that some of them will actually apply to our graduate programs and then come here. And I've been really lucky to have a few of those students now working in my lab. And I never would have had this opportunity to be working with these students had we not made the effort to reach out to those students and to encourage them to apply here. So, my grad students today are pushing the boundaries of the research I do in directions I never would have imagined I'm going in, right? Studying Islamophobia, studying intergenerational trauma, studying how the media portrayal of violence against African Americans impacts the mental health of African Americans. Those are not things I ever would have initially studied. But my graduate students bring that to the lab and really enrich and broaden the kind of work we're doing now. Well, I could tell you right now, during the COVID pandemic, Asian Americans have been targeted. The discrimination they're experiencing, the xenophobia, right, are at all-time highs. And the work I'm doing directly informs, right, how families can prepare their children for these types of encounters. When government officials are referring to COVID-19 as the China flu, right, or Kung flu, that only fans the flames of fear in Americans and puts a target on the backs of Asian Americans. Just recently, there was a Asian American woman in the Twin Cities who was accosted and being blamed for the virus, right? In our COVID wellness study that we've been running on campus, we had many participants, respondents, talk about their fear of going out in public, and in particular wearing a mask. I mean, it's good public health hygiene to wear a mask, right? And it's ridiculous that you have to worry that people are judging you, right, or going to blame you. So I think the work I'm doing right now is very relevant, because we're living in a heightened racialized society right now. And, it's deeply disturbing to me when Asian Americans and other immigrant and minoritized communities can't feel safe in their own homes and neighborhoods, when they can't have a sense of belonging and community where they live. That's deeply disturbing. And it's even more painful to imagine having to raise your children in this environment and having to talk to your kids about racism and teaching them that they should feel proud to be who they are. And so the work I'm doing directly informs how we can best talk to your children about discrimination, about being teased, or about, what it means to be Korean or Hmong or an adoptee in this country. when the pandemic hit and we all started to work remotely, it was an opportunity for me to think about what can I do? And one of the things that really struck me was that when we study university life, we tend to focus on students, specifically undergraduate students. But I was actually interested in the larger university community and how was COVID-19 affecting all of us. And so I approached my grad students and said, I'd love us to shift or pivot some of our research to look at how COVID-19 is affecting university life, from faculty to staff to grad students to undergrads. And so to do that work, the first thing we wanted to do was really just understand what are the concerns from these different constituencies at the U. So the way we approached doing the study was to first survey people with a lot of open-ended questions, just to hear firsthand how people are feeling and handling the pandemic, distance learning, wearing a mask, etc. And then from that, we were able to then tailor our survey to really focus on the issues that were raised initially by faculty, staff, and students. And we've now collected 3 waves of data from the university community, and we're beginning to now analyze that. One of the striking features of that work was initially the fact that many Asian Americans and African Americans were expressing fears about wearing a mask, about being in public. And this is before the George Floyd killing. This was at the start of the pandemic. And so we started to ask more questions about discrimination, about social distancing challenges. And then we were ready to launch our 3rd survey just on Memorial Day, when news broke of the police killing of George Floyd. And I paused the release of that survey, and we made some adjustments to the survey to ask questions about George Floyd's death, the racial unrest, and what were people doing? Who were they talking to about these experiences? And so we were able to make that quick adjustment, right, to account for all the changes happening around us. And right now I have a graduate student who is centering her current research on responses to those questions in particular, to look at how communities of color at the university and how they in particular are handling the racial unrest that we have in our city right now. So related to that, this summer I also taught a class on the COVID-19 wellness survey. So I had undergraduate students working in my lab, looking over the data with me to help them gain some meaning from this experience, right, in a learning environment. And that was a great opportunity for them to be able to, in a sense, look the pandemic in the eye, right, but with this scientific lens. And then challenge them to also figure out how to incorporate what they're learning into their own lives. So, for example, I had the students go and talk to a family member or relative about the police killing of George Floyd and the racial uprising. And then we had them read about how to talk about racism and discrimination and the science behind that. And so they were able, again, to bring to life what they're reading in class and then look also at the data that we have in front of us. So one of the newer projects that we have going right now is focusing on how Korean adoptees can have more agency in their own lives. And one of the ways in which Korean adoptees are taking control of their lives is by taking advantage of new medical technology. So for example, Korean adoptees know very little about their birth family. And birth records, adoption records are hard to access and often not reliable. New advances in medical technology provide them with a new tool, genetic testing. Both direct-to-consumer genetic testing as well as provider-prescribed genetic testing can now provide adoptees with an opportunity to learn more about their ancestry, about their biological relatives, as well as their biological health history. And so genetic testing provides a way for Korean adoptees to get in touch with a part of their culture and heritage that they wouldn't have been able to get in touch with before. And that type of a project really reflects how people are trying to make sense of their diaspora experience. You know, we have a yearning for our homeland, for understanding where we come from. And in the case of these Korean adoptees, they are able to use genetic testing as one tool, right, to give them some insight and some connection to their ethnic heritage that they wouldn't have been able to do before. We're also really interested in better understanding what it means to yearn for your homeland. Whether you're an adoptee trying to learn about your heritage culture, or you're someone like my father who immigrated over 55 years ago and still thinks about his homeland. And so we've begun to study how the diaspora and that feeling of being displaced psychologically affects us and our identities and how we see ourselves in this world. And so we're beginning to explore ways of better measuring that type of a homeland yearning and to understand how it shapes our identities and our choices that we make in our life, right? We see that not just in adoptees or immigrants like my father, but we also see that in refugees from East Africa and remittances, right? When immigrants make money here and send it back home, right? Or how immigrants still keep up with, national politics of their homeland, right? Or how immigrants will make trips back and have plans to retire in their homeland. And so we're really interested in understanding that diaspora experience and how it sort of spans one's life course. When I was finishing up graduate school and beginning my career, I was fortunate to be mentored by a well-known Korean American journalist who was an activist in the local Korean American community in Northern California. And his name is K.W. Lee, and he's often referred to as the godfather of Asian American journalism. And one day he pulled me aside and was talking to me and said, you know, Rich, your generation, right, needs to step up. Your parents' generation, my generation, immigrants, we've had to deal with discrimination and racism our whole lives, but we've just had to sort of ignore it and bend over and just sort of work hard and hope for a better day in the future. And then he looked at me and he said, but your generation, you were born here and you have the King's English on your tongue. And your family, your parents have been waiting for you to tell their story, to stand up when they couldn't stand up. That's on your generation. That's what you need to do. And I remember when he told me that, how powerful it was, because it made me realize that the work we're doing is not just an intellectual endeavor. The work we're doing shapes the lives of people, impacts the lives of people. And it's people who often are silenced, are overlooked, are forgotten about. And that's really what drives me in the work I do, that I want to be able to tell their stories, to put their experiences first and have that guide the work I do, whether I'm studying Korean adoption or studying refugees or studying how people are impacted by COVID-19. I need to put other people's experiences first and build upon that and to elevate that, and to do it in a way that honors and respects their experience.